Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another very special episode of the Unfiltered, Uncensored, and Unapologetically Black podcast show, Speak to the Mic. I am your illustrious host, Marlon Joseph. And as you may know, I've made a transition from what the primary objective of this show is predicated on by merely stating the fact that this show is primarily about imparting education on the Black community being provided to you by Black men and women of all professions, and doing it in the most unapologetically Black way possible. Because what we do here, what we say here, and the type of message that we deliver here is to help move the culture forward in a more positive direction, in a more positive way. Make sure you all hit that like, share, subscribe button on my YouTube channel, on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, every last one of the podcast platforms that you can find this show on. This is very vital and important information that you don't want to miss out on. I will be continuously putting out more and more content as it relates to everything that we're going through on an everyday basis in the Black community, and how we can collectively come together to develop actionable items to help us move forward and be able to progress in those particular areas that we have in the most trouble with, which is multi-layered and multifaceted. Speaking of, joining me today is a very special person, Fatima Oliver, who is not only an author of her own book, The Prescription is in the Dirt, but also a life coach as well, here to talk to me about overcoming childhood trauma and how we are able to deal with that trauma in real time. Fatima, thank you so much for taking this time to speak with me about this matter. As you and I both know, this is multi-layered and multifaceted, and so many different things to touch on. But I'm going to try to do my best to touch on the core things that we can speak about now, and then obviously, plan for other times for you to be on the show as well, because as you know, our issues are not one-offs. These are continuous and ongoing issues that we have to address, that we have to overcome, and have to be able to be at a better place at, so we can live the better version of ourselves that we know how to, that we have within us to live, right? So again, I appreciate you taking the time to be on the show with me to talk about this. I know it's a very touchy subject for a lot of people that I know, even for me personally. I am dealing with and have dealt with childhood trauma in my own life that I'm having to be very intentional and conscientious about. And so, but I want to start off just for starters, how has it been for you in terms of what inspired you to write a book about, or just telling your story? What inspired you to write this book, The Prescription that is in the Dirt?
Yeah.
Where did that title come from? Where that idea come from, as well as what does this book embody?
Yeah, well, thank you first, Marla, for having me on. I'm very excited about that. And so the prescription is in the dirt. The point of the title in itself is that a lot of our healing comes from those dirty things. Our growth comes from those dirty things. And so when I say dirty things, I'm talking for myself. Being sexually abused, physically abused, the death of a child, being disfigured, just different things that happened in my life that were, excuse me, taboo to talk about, that brought shame, anything that was a hurt or a hang up in my life that I tried to bury because I didn't want anybody to know about. It was only until I started to truly face my own personal mess, that I began to grow. And so, like with anything, dirt can be a great component to be able to allow you to flourish, or just like grow, plants to allow them to flourish. But dirt can also be was placed on the burial site and in a dead situation. And so if you think about that symbolically, a lot of us are walking around like zombies in our lives with chips on our shoulders and with bitterness and rage and sorrow deep inside of us from situations that we view as dead, right? But we haven't done the work truly to push them aside and to allow them to be demolished within inside of us. If we get the courage to be able to face those things head on, just like the dirt can be used as rich soil to help things grow, that's what it can also do for our lives if we allow those dirty things to be exposed, to be faced, to allow room for them to be healed. In us, ourselves, can grow in such exponential ways and honestly get to a place of where our purpose lies.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And the fact that we oftentimes ignore the signs of most of the things that we didn't even really think about was bothering us or was traumatic
Yeah.
to us until something triggers that traumatic event, like that takes us back to that place where, okay, we were most fearful or most angry or most emotional,
Yeah.
and we didn't know how to deal with that because we didn't have the necessary tools, resources, or even people around us to help us address or unpack those traumatic events that we were going. So,
Yeah.
uh, more specifically, because in this particular topic, I want to talk primarily about childhood trauma that a lot of us are still unpacking even as adults
Yeah.
today, as it trickles down to our relationship, as it trickles down to our even just our parental experiences for our own selves, becoming parents. How has it been for you personally when it comes to dealing with your own childhood trauma? How has that been?
It was, I mean, truly a dynamic journey. And what I mean by that is there were some awesome discoveries, but there was so much pain and revelations that I felt like I wasn't ready for. I just decided that I wanted my freedom. So, despite feeling unprepared to handle the emotional aspect of things that was being revealed, I decided to keep moving forward because I just believed that there was something greater on the other side. So, what I mean by that is, I was triggered. I had triggers just like anybody else.
Yeah.
I had a very discontent, weird type of dynamic with my family. And there were things that happened to me, specifically sexual abuse, where it truly traumatized me as a child and as an adult, and the fact that I grew up in a space where my mom um, taught me based on the silent generation, which meant we don't talk about that type of stuff, right? So
Unfortunately, like most parents,
like most
older
parents, right?
generation, you
And so I went through my life, and when those memories would come up of the incident, I would push it down because we don't talk about that type of stuff, right? And so I lived my life in a space of, I say, on simmer. So you never knew when I was going to pop off, basically, because anything
like
could take
most of
me on
us,
overload.
it
Yeah.
don't take too much now.
It didn't take too much. And that was because there was so much emotion, so much pain, so much confusion, so much agony that was inside of me from far back as I could remember that I had never processed. And I wasn't able to correlate this pain comes from this and this rage comes from this. I didn't even start the process because from the door, it was, we don't talk about that. And if I'm not, a lot of times in our community, we celebrate anger, right? We don't, but the sorrow, if you say I'm sad, if you say I feel humiliated, I feel embarrassed, I'm scared, it's like, what's wrong with you? So I grew up in that space of toughen up, stop wearing your feelings on your shoulder, on your sleeve. And so it was very, very, very difficult for me to open up and say, I have to deal with this. And it truly took me until I was in a space where I was wanting to end my life, where I was living in this space of sorrow for so long. And I had all the things I said, if I got them, I would feel better. I had those things. And I had a family and I had an awesome job and I was making great income, but I was still feeling like my life was horrible, that on the inside, I just had so much pain screaming inside of me and I didn't know how to articulate it. And it truly, truly took me get into a space where I was literally in my car in a vacant parking lot, fresh off of work, saying, I really am going to go ahead and put this bag over my head and suffocate myself. And I'm just grateful that I knew enough to know that that was unhealthy thinking. And it pushed me to say, why? Why am I in this space? Why do I feel this way? And it was those questions that I started to ask myself is truly what opened up the door for me to start, the healing journey, baby steps, because I didn't know what the heck I was doing, but I knew that I needed help. I knew that what I was going through was not normal. And I was tired of pretending.
Yeah. And you know what? A lot of us, unfortunately, when it comes to relating to those very issues, we know that all too well. We're told to sweep things under the rug and, bounce it off your shoulders. It's not a big deal. Don't cry. Don't show no emotions about it.
Oh.
It's not the end of the world. When in all actuality, that is basically that benefits the detriment to what we're dealing with. That's how we're able to carry this from a mere 6-year-old to a 26-year-old, right? It's not being able to be in a space where we can unpack and talk about how this type of event or these types of events in general have affected us and what it
Right,
did to us in a detrimental way. We're not
right,
able to have that because one, we don't have the resources, or we're not known to have resources available to us during those times when we were kids versus now. The resources are obviously being more advocated for in today's time. And the whole idea of going to counseling and prioritizing your mental health is being pushed out in a much more uh, a vital rate than it's ever been in the Black community, right? Now we're aware of the fact that most of the weight that you have to lose is not physically on you.
hmm.
It's emotionally in you, right? And so the fact that we're able to be at a place now where the resources are starting to become much more fluent for us or just available and convenient for us, we can start to unpack those things. But the problem is, in most cases, the damage was done already years ago. And so for you personally, how has it been for you to navigate through life up to this point when it comes to dealing with those childhood traumatic events that you dealt with in your life? How has that affected you as a grown adult now, as a mother, as a just as an individual today versus how it was impacting you in real time during that
Yeah. So when I really, first of all, we're so it is so normal for us to say that's our crazy cousin or that's our crazy,
time?
but we're more accepting of that than we are, in my experience, we're more acceptive of that than we are they're going to go get therapy to work out their issues.
Right.
And so when I realized I actually had went to a doctor about 10, 12, 13 years, about probably 13 years ago, and I found out that I had clinical depression. And that was the first time actually I was in a space where I really wanted to end my life. And I was ashamed. I was ashamed to tell my family. I was ashamed to tell anybody. I didn't tell anybody for about 2 months that I was actually taking medicine to help me to think more clear, to help me to not be so emotionally wound up, to not be living on simmer, basically.
Yeah.
And so I felt that once I did share that it was a stigma and that it was taboo and that I just was looked at as so fragile because of the fact that I had went to the doctor and got help. When in actuality, that took a whole lot of courage, right? That took a whole lot of strength to be able to stand across from a stranger and say, I need help. This is what's happening to me. And so in that context, it was backwards. So I didn't have the support that I wish I would have had during that time. And so whenever somebody that we would hear about would commit suicide or try to commit suicide, and just the banter that would happen as far as criticism, I felt ashamed because I was on that path. I didn't do it, but I was on that path. So a lot of the time that I was dealing or trying to manage my trauma, I felt ashamed by the way that I had to go about managing it. And it truly wasn't until my healing and my freedom became more important to me than what people thought. It was only up until that time that things started to shift for me. In other words, I started realizing that it's my life. And that even though I may not have caused the pain that I'm trying to figure out how to process, I am responsible for learning how to live with it. I am responsible for learning how to be my best self. That's my charge as long as I have breath in my body. And so with that, I made the conscious choice to ensure that I had the right people around me in my community, in my little circle, the people that would speak life into me and who would support me on this journey of uncovering the pain that I had, what it was associated with, and getting the perspectives that I needed, walking through the forgiveness process, or getting toxic people out of my life. I decided that I was going to surround myself with the right people that would support me going through that process. And then I decided to go to counseling, and then I decided to really, really, really immerse myself into programs that would help me to truly, truly stand up and confront my situations, confront them head on, not run away, and take accountability where the accountability was at, if it was mine, and also try to see a different perspective beyond my pain if I felt it wasn't my fault, and then working towards being able to release that pain that was associated with that incident, releasing the emotion so that when I spoke about it, I no longer was living it, feeling like all over again. So it was definitely a journey. It was not easy. It was very tough. But in actuality, I have dealt with tough things my entire life. Many of us have. Many of us have lived in a survival mindset. And that's because of where we've come from, what we've been around. I don't think we give enough respect in a sense of how our culture and how our family and how our religion impacts the way that we develop. And so a lot of us have come from places where we had to survive. It wasn't about your parents talking about what you can become when you get older. It was about how can we get food on the table, right? And so a lot of us know how to survive horrible situations, but we never learn how to process the emotional aspect of surviving those things. And so when I got to a place where I was ready to process those things that I thought I had left in my life long ago, but they were on my back all along through every success, I was carrying them around in a backpack. And that's why I had the chip on my shoulder. And that's why I was needy. And that's why I didn't trust nobody. All these things, all these behavioral things that I was showing outwardly. When I decided to deal with the emotional aspect of everything I survived, that's when I began to see the change. And in that, I'm just so grateful because I know that I'm a different person. I know that I feel more free than I ever have in my life. And we talk about, I want to be free. I want to be free. I didn't know what that looked like until I truly, truly experienced it. And that meant that's even though I lost family members, even though I lost friends, even though I am judged for the decisions that I had to make to release people from my life that didn't understand my journey, right? Even in the midst of all those hard, tough situations that I had to encounter, I feel so much more free. And it was because I did the work for myself, that I took accountability for my life. And even though I was a victim in a lot of things, there was still a turning point where you are held accountable for what you understand. And there was a place in my life where I began to understand that the things that I was doing, even though I learned them, it was learned behavior, was wrong. And so once I took that accountability and I started changing my own life for me, not to wag my finger and say, I told you I could do it, but for me, it was only until I started walking steps to change it for myself is when I truly, truly, truly started walking in the freedom that I didn't even imagine was even available for me.
Listen, you said a ton in that particular aspect of just being able to talk to and give your testimony about what it is that you had to make that choice to do for yourself, right? So it's unfortunate that in the Black community, when you get to a place of making those decisions for yourself to cut people off who don't
Yeah,
mean you any good, and cutting toxic people off, and people who haven't been pouring life into you, supporting you, things of that nature, they tend to say you changed, but what really changed was your perspective on life and how to deal with and navigate through that life. Now
yeah,
that you're at a better place of knowing what you didn't know all along, and what
right,
was right there in front of you to know that
right.
certain things that you were dealing with and going through was not necessarily in your best interest.
But
It
I think it's
wasn't the most
okay.
healthiest thing to go through, but it was what
Right.
we were known for going through because that's all we knew. And
Yeah,
you can't be faulted for ignorance to a certain point in your life, especially as a child. But once you become an adult, not knowing is not an excuse you can use anymore.
right.
And so you have to make that decision. And so I want to ask you this question in regards to that personal journey that you have taken, and still currently taking, because we know healing is an ongoing process.
Absolutely.
There's no destination for healing. The journey is the destination when it comes to healing, because you have to continuously make progress
Yeah,
in becoming a better version of you each and every day, right? So tomorrow's you is going to be, it needs to be better than today's you, right?
absolutely.
That's the progress we have to keep making every single day in our personal individual lives in order to become a better person, in order to become a better parent, better spouse, better friend, things of that nature. So for you, throughout that journey, what was the deciding factor, if there was even one deciding factor for you, that made you say, you know what, I have to make this choice for myself? And in
Mm,
making that choice, how has going to counseling helped you in that journey?
mm. So truly, truly, I mean, if I were to be real candid, I was desperate. I was desperate for to save my life.
Absolutely.
And it was that right there that I was seeking to save my life for the sake of my children, right? Because remember, I said that I was in a space where I was ready to end my life. And so in this place, it was like I was giving myself a life jacket. And so that it was that despite me feeling embarrassed about going to therapy, have my dark glasses on, my hat on, keep my head down, I don't want nobody to see me. Right? Despite me feeling like black people don't go to therapy. Oh my God, people are gonna talk about me. All these
Yeah.
generational narratives playing in my head. Despite all of that, I was trying to save my life. And that's really what it boiled
Absolutely.
down to. And what I mean by that is my existence, obviously, but what was happening on the inside of me, that was dying on the inside of me, the spirit that was dying on the inside of me, it was me trying to save my life. That was the turning point for me. And so um, I had some tough decisions to make. That am I going to continue to spiral out of control? And nobody really knows that that's what's happening with me, and give my children a traumatic ending and start trauma for them? Or am I going to take accountability for my life and really truly start to look at these areas and determine where this pain, where this agony is coming from, where this anguish is coming from, to where I feel like I can't live no more. When I went to therapy, therapy was very helpful. But I think it took, for me, I consider it a soul healing journey. And that's what I bring to the people that I work with, that I facilitate healing with. A soul healing journey for me is when you listen, you take the time to listen to what's happening uh, physically and emotionally and mentally and spiritually. So for me, spirituality was always such a huge central point for my life. But during that point where I felt like I wanted to end my life, I wasn't praying. I wasn't doing much of anything spiritual. I could barely eat. Like I said, I was popping off at my family for no reason, just being over angry for simple situations to where I was unpredictable. Mentally, I couldn't think. I couldn't do well at work. I was, forgetting and not completing work, and even breaking down, crying on the job. And that's the emotional aspect. I was just sad. It felt like a cloud was following me everywhere I went, and everybody else was seeing sunshine, and rain was on me everywhere I went. I was just sad, full of sorrow. And so I decided to listen and pay attention to all those aspects of who I am. And in that, decide that something had to change because I don't want to live like that. I don't want to live like that. And I mean, it's really that simple, right? Do you want to continue to be that way or not?
Right.
And that's when I really decided that I had to be proactive in my healing. That I couldn't go to this therapist and just tell them, okay, look at here. All I need you to do is tell me how to deal with this anxiety that I'm having 5 days out of 7 days out of the week. Okay. I don't need you to be asking me what's going on in my family, my trauma. I ain't hitting no pillows. I'm not writing no letters. I'm not doing none of this stuff. Just tell me what to do so that I cannot have this anxiety.
I'm
And
glad you
I
know it
did.
don't work that.
It don't work
It's
that
like
way,
it's
but I was like, I'm gonna
yeah.
give you some ground rules, right? I'm here, but I'm giving you some ground rules because number one, we don't do this anyway. And so it took about a month before I really got to a place where I had to have I call it a come to Jesus meeting. And I realized that I had to participate in my own healing, that
Absolutely.
it wasn't going to be served on a platter for me, that I was going to have to get in that dirt that had accumulated, dig down to the bottom where the roots were at, and
Yeah.
pull them bad boys up. And that is what I did with every single huge boulder at that time in my life that I felt were stumbling blocks. So that was sexual abuse. What happened? What was the situation that occurred? What happened after I shared it? Was that a good thing or a bad thing? How have it impacted my life since then? And how have I seen it manifesting negatively in my life? Oh, that's why I act that way. That's why I do that. Now that I see those behavioral things, what am I going to do? It's my responsibility. What am I going to do with those behavioral things? I
Yeah.
can't, it's not my responsibility about all the other stuff that happened to me, but the behavioral things that I've picked up due to it, I can control those. Right. So
Very much
now,
so.
what are the resources I'm going to use and the tools that I'm going to use to get rid of those behavioral things one at a time, baby step approach,
Yeah.
as I focus on the fact that it was not my fault and push the blame back on the people that it is and releasing myself from that guilt, releasing myself from the rage, releasing myself from all of that, because why am I carrying that? I need to release that so that I can move forward with my life and be my best self. And so with every single big boulder in my life at that time, I faced it like that head on. What was the situation? Who were the people? What happened? How did it make me feel? How did it damage me? Meaning those feelings that I felt, how did those feelings change my perspective on life? Now I would never date these type of men. Now whenever I get into this type of setting, I close inward because I'm afraid to talk because this happened to me when I was a child. How did it damage me? And then from there, realistically facing it and saying, who was at fault? Was it you? Was it them? Was it just was it a misunderstanding that you took overboard? Or was it something truly, truly, truly nothing that a child should have had to deal with in their life and that it was just done to you? Who was at fault? And if it is not your fault, don't carry it anymore as your fault. And so
Absolutely.
I had to make those tough decisions to say, I'm not carrying this anymore. And in that, honestly, once I decided this ain't my problem, this their problem, this their dysfunction, they put me in this situation. Every single time I made decisions like that, I became more free. I became more free. And I learned in that process to not only be an advocate for myself and an advocate for my freedom, but also, which was very difficult, was to understand that it is not my responsibility to make somebody else own their mess. Only thing I can do is give my pain a voice, which was what I was doing when I was walking through these incidences. I was validating the trauma that had happened to me, giving it validation that other people said just brush off, toughen up. I was giving it validation. And so validating my pain, giving my pain a voice, but the rest of it, the mess that didn't belong to me, it was not my responsibility to make them understand how they hurt me. It was my responsibility to heal myself, allow healing to start manifesting in my life and moving forward with purpose.
Absolutely. And you know what? I mean, and even in that instance, right? So one of the most challenging things that we have to deal with in life is unlearning things. Because for a long time in the Black community, we were taught so many toxic things to do or not do that that's all we knew. right? And
Yeah.
so but once you got to a place in life where you realize that wasn't the right way of doing that at all,
Right.
and now you're having to really be conscientious and intentional with having to undo or unlearn those habits, those behavioral traits
Yeah.
and things of that nature. We had to really be conscientious about, okay, because I oftentimes tell myself personally, wait, what am I doing? I don't live like that anymore. I don't
Yeah.
have to do that. Right. I don't
Right.
I'm not in survival mode anymore. And a lot of
Right.
us coming from a place, and you said that earlier about how in the Black community, we're oftentimes acting in or even living in
Yeah.
survival mode all day, every day. I'm not thinking about 5, 10 years from now. I'm thinking about
Yeah.
today and maybe even tomorrow. I'm gonna
Yeah.
make it to tomorrow. And it's
Yeah.
like those short-term thoughts help basically very detrimental to your long-term goals in life and even
Yeah.
having long-term goals to begin with. Most of us don't even have long-term goals because we haven't even been taught to think
Yes.
outside of today, think further than tomorrow. It's like
Yeah.
having to plan for life and understanding that it's going to be bumps along the way throughout that road of your journey in life. But at the same token, understanding to be more conscientious about the moments that you're in and been obviously making the right decisions for yourself as an adult. Because like you said earlier, as children, you're not responsible for the traumatic events that you go on that you are subdued to in life.
Yeah.
But as an adult, you are responsible for how you overcome those traumatic events that you had to deal
Yeah.
with for so long. You are responsible for what that outcome is going to be because now you have no one else to blame but you. We can
Yeah.
talk about things that happened in the past that helped that was a hindrance to you and hurt you in such a way. But once that's out in the forefront, what are you doing next? Knowing is only
Absolutely.
half the battle.
Yeah.
Applying what you know is what is going to really get you to a place in life where, man, I didn't think life can be like this for myself, but I'm
Yes.
here now. And so, and in being there, staying there is actually harder than just being there because you can be there today and then be right back in it tomorrow. So you
Yeah.
have to know that it's a conscientious and intentional decisions you have to make to continuously progress because there's no 100% in this thing.
Yeah.
100% is just today. Tomorrow, it's a new 100% you got to be, right?
Mm.
So having to unpack those situations and be able to say you're at a better place now than where you started, that's progression, right? And
Yeah.
so for you, was it ever a time for you that you found yourself having to step away or just step out of your out of body experience in terms of something that triggered you based on the traumatic events that took place in your childhood that you in your adult life now something triggered that off and then you had to like wait, what am I doing? And this
Yeah.
in regards to being a parent, so obviously when you were once a child, now a parent,
Yeah.
what are some of the things that you had to be conscientious and very intentional with in terms of how to approach being a parent versus how you were as a child and having your parents approach you in those situations?
Yeah. So one of the huge things for me is allowing my children to speak what's on their heart because I wasn't able to do that as a child.
Absolutely.
It was do as I say, not as I do. And it
Ah,
was,
know that too
you didn't
well.
have no opinion. I didn't have an opinion. I grew up so and I probably should have gave some type of introduction to myself, but I grew up with all brothers, have 5 brothers. I was the only girl. And then I wound up having all boys, 4 boys.
Wow.
I'm always around dudes, that's just, I'm a
Yeah.
little rough around the edges.
Yeah.
I'm a strong, straight shooter. My husband oftentimes tell me, you just don't know what to say, do you? Like, I'm just like that chick.
I'm that way. My
So,
wife gets on me about that. So I
so
can
for
understand.
sure. But growing up with all brothers, there was no different way. You got raised the same way.
Yeah.
I got raised the same way my brothers got raised. And so and not all the time was that a good thing. So emotionally, I was disconnected. I didn't know how to process, and we've talked about that. But I also didn't have an opinion. And so when I got to an age where I wanted to share how I truly felt, I became the black sheep. And it was like, I'm the black sheep, right? Because I have an opinion, because I have a voice. So I learned very early to not speak up for myself, to not advocate for myself, to not be able to say, this hurts me when you say this, or this hurt me when this happened. And so now, as a parent, I definitely think it's important, especially raising Black boys, Black men in waiting, to me, kings. That's how I view it.
Absolutely.
It is very important to teach them how to articulate themselves, to be able to articulate their feelings. Because again, we are often taught to celebrate anger, to celebrate rage. And that rage and anger, a lot of times, is just masked hurt.
It
And
is
so I
very
don't
much
want my
so.
children walking around just angry all the time. And
Yeah.
I want them to know that they can share with me. I may not agree with what they say, and there may be a time where I just say, "Okay, just shut up and listen," right?
Right.
Because I am an old school mama at the core, because that's how
Yeah.
I grew up, right? But I do see, because of what I personally endured, and because of everything I had to work through, and I continue to have to work through and get triggered from, it made me realize how important it is to be able to have a voice for yourself. Even as a child, it's important for them to have a voice for themselves, to be able to say, this hurts me, or
Absolutely.
I felt that I didn't feel seen, or I didn't feel, whatever it is that they're feeling, or I feel angry.
Yeah.
Even if it's a misunderstanding, and being able to talk it through, right? Not just going and for us, discipline was beatings. Those are those are two punishment and discipline are two completely different things.
Very
But when
much
I
so.
grew up,
Very
they
much so.
were the same, right? And so
Yep.
just learning those things, learning to separate that, and to discipline more, and to not always punish in the way that I grew up. And so I just think that was very important, like, to the point where, when my middle son, there's always one in your family, and he's the one that's just got that mouth that reminds you of yourself. And so
Yeah.
he lives on that line of, oh my God, you're the best kid ever, and say that one more time. Like, he lives right there on that line. So,
Oh
and
yeah,
so,
trust and believe.
you know,
The kids will try you at
they
every
will
age and
try
stage,
you.
and I'm
And so,
realizing that. I have a
yeah.
my oldest child is my daughter. She'll be 5 next month, and yeah, she tests my patience that I don't have.
Yeah. Right, that
It's
you
like,
don't have, right?
okay,
But the
let me
freedom,
calm down.
right? The
Let me
freedom,
listen to
though,
her.
the
Okay.
the freedom that they feel to be able to share,
Yeah.
that's a blessing, right?
It
To me,
really
that's
is.
a
It really
that's
is.
a that's a generational behavior that has been broken. The fact that they feel the freedom to be able to be themselves. And again, that's just
Absolutely.
not what I felt. But in regards to triggers, even when school started, and my older son, he had an issue at the school where you have to have a badge to be able to um, eat in the cafeteria, and he
Yeah.
didn't have a badge, so he wasn't able to eat for 2 days. That infuriated me on such a level that I couldn't even understand why it infuriated me on that level. Now, of course,
Yeah.
as a parent, and I'm a mama bear, I check the situation, okay?
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
beyond the checking, because of the healing journey that I've been on, because of all the work that I've done, on my triggers, and where they stem from, I recognize that I was a bit over vigilant. And
Yeah.
that's how we get sometimes in our healing. We
Yeah.
say, like, this happened to me, this dude cheated on me, I would never be cheated on again. So now you become over vigilant and suspicious about every single thing, right?
Yeah.
So for me, I grew up hungry. As a child, we grew up hungry. And it wasn't because my mom didn't try, it's because she didn't have no help. And the system, and
Same
how the
here.
system
Same
works.
here.
So she often worked 2 jobs, and we had to wait until she got home to eat. And so we were hungry all the time. And we had to stand in food bank lines. I've stood in a food bank line with my mom as a child,
Yeah.
many of them. So I know the experience of what it feels like to be hungry. And the idea that my son was experiencing that what I had experienced as a
That was
child,
a trigger.
it
Yeah, that was
it triggered
that
me.
hit you different
Right. It hit me
compared to
different.
how
And
it
so,
actually impacted him. It
right,
impacted him, but
right.
it didn't touch him nearly as much
Not
as it
in
did
any
you. Like
way.
it hit a nerve in you.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes. For him, he was like, "Well, Mom, I wasn't hungry." I was like, "That's not the point."
Yeah.
That's not the point. And so, yes, absolutely. And I had to go back and process that and say, Fatima, this incident has been resolved. It's done. Why are you still shaking?
Yeah.
Why are you still so angry? Why do you feel like your blood pressure is still high? I had to talk that out with one of the people in my safe place. I had to speak about that and process it to understand that it triggered me from my childhood of how I felt during those times and the fact that it brought back all those emotions all over again. And so, yeah, so even, like you said, healing is ever evolving, healing is continuous, and you continue to see things in your life that you do generationally that are awesome, but
Yeah.
that you do generationally that are troubling. And it is your responsibility to take ownership of what you brought to the table and diffuse it, demolish it, change the behavior. That's your responsibility as an individual.
Absolutely. You know what? And I link being a parent now to how it once was. So I'm oftentimes friends of mine, even me and my wife talk about this too, about how being an urban parent raising suburban kids, right? So
Right?
it's like the audacity that you guys have to be
Oh my
so
gosh.
privileged and privy to a lot of different things that we didn't have. I'm like, we live in a big house, and I
Right.
grew up in an apartment building. It was only a 2 bedroom, and it was 5 of us in the house, right? So it's like
Right.
comparing that to, I'm like, my daughter and my son, they both have their own rooms, they got their own everything, and I'm just like looking at this, but at the same,
Right.
almost somewhat envious of what they have, but also
Mhm.
understanding that I, as a parent, as a father, and as their mother, we're providing that for them,
Yeah.
mainly because these are the necessities that they need in life to help them have a healthier perspective on life and have a
Yeah.
healthier childhood. The innocence of a child should never be stripped away from them.
Yeah.
And for a lot of us, unfortunately,
Mm.
we had to be subdued to having to be adults sooner than our age would even allow us to
Yeah.
be, right?
Yeah.
Having to work and help pay for bills and help pay for food and things of that nature around the house to help our
Yeah.
moms out. Most of us coming from single parent families and things of that
Yeah.
nature. So it's like our mother was basically for a long time all we had. So I had to. I've been working since I was 14 years old, and I had to, take some of that money as much as I wanted to just spend it on just wasteless things, which I did as a
Yeah.
teenager, right? But taking some of the money and then having to pay a light bill here and there or buy some food here and there,
Yeah.
things like that, that takes away the innocence of a child just merely being
Absolutely.
a child. A child should not be
Absolutely.
responsible for adult situations. This
Mm.
roof got to be provided for you to live in.
Yeah.
Your number one and only responsibility as a child needs to be your education. That's it.
Absolutely.
You shouldn't be responsible
Absolutely.
for having to provide your own food and clothes and shelter and things like that.
Yeah.
No child should be subdued to that. And for a
Yeah.
lot of us in the Black community, unfortunately, we have been subjected to that. Not, and some of us has been subjected to that based on ignorance, right?
Mhm.
Just merely not knowing how to navigate through that, and it being a generational thing being passed on. Our parents were subjected to that by their parents, and so forth and so on. And so, a lot of our environmental situations that we deal with have been generationally passed down so much to a point where it's the norm.
It's normal.
This is what we know. It's like, well, what you're doing is abnormal. Like that's not. No, we don't do that. This is
Yeah.
what we do, and this is why we do it, right? But then not even understanding that why you're doing it, you don't even understand why you're doing it. You're just doing
Right.
it because now it's become a second language to you
Yeah.
to do that. And through life, we know it takes 21 days to develop a habit, right? And habits become lifestyle.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for us, we have a lot of unhealthy lifestyles that we as adults today, especially us millennials, having to unpack those traumatic situations and events that took place in our lives as children without us like consciously knowing about it. It's like, wait, this happened to me. This is too familiar and
Yeah.
not in a good way. Let me
Yeah.
step back and look at this in hindsight. Okay, what am I doing? Or what am I not doing in a situation that's healthy or unhealthy?
Yeah.
And up for us being parents now, it's like, okay, I have to be way more conscientious about my decision making when it comes to my kids versus how my parents were for us. And it's not about finger pointing blame, point blame to anyone,
Right.
but it's merely understanding that not everything our parents did was right. Everything they
Yeah.
did was wrong either. But the understanding about the forgiveness piece that you brought up earlier is that some of our parents, and I oftentimes on this show have encouraged my listeners to start having these uncomfortable
I'm
conversations with
so
your
glad you
parent
brought that up.
because it's going to ultimately help you, whether they give you, whether they even ask for forgiveness or not, because a lot of our parents are very, very stern, very stubborn about
Yeah.
their stance and what they did. Well, nobody's perfect, and we all make bad decisions, just generalizing things. We have to
Yeah.
just take that with a grain of salt and say, you know what? The fact that we're having this discussion now and you're not even able to even admit that, I still have to move on with my life because
Right.
you don't have that control over my life now. You're still my parents, still love you,
Right.
but I have to take control and ownership of my life from this point forward to make
Right.
the conscious decision to undo what was done to me or around me.
Absolutely. Let
Yeah,
me say, because I was so hoping that we were able to discuss that.
yeah,
So, and so I had my own journey in that aspect, but I really, really, really want to discuss. You said a lot of times that it was our mom or just one parent, that was all we had, right? I
yeah,
definitely believe, and that's just and maybe it was because it was my personal experience. And I wrote about it in my book called I Said What I Said. And it talks about generational habits. And I definitely believe that a lot of the reason why I was a codependent person, meaning I did whatever was necessary for the person to remain in my life. So even though it wasn't healthy, I
yeah,
would do things for my family, my immediate family, the ones that I grew up with, my brothers that I slept in the same bed with, my mom, who was the only one that was there. I would agree to do things that I knew made no sense, that made me so uncomfortable, but I did it anyway
yeah,
because I was afraid that if I didn't, I would lose them because
yeah,
they were the only people that were in my life. And so
yeah.
they had
Doing
become
things to appease the masses.
right. So
That's another issue.
they had become they were my lifeline for
Yeah,
so long. They were my lifeline. And I felt that if I lost them, I wouldn't be able to survive. It truly would have been an out of body experience to lose them. Really, I
yeah,
really felt my life would be at a detriment. And so when it came to the childhood trauma, and to your point, having to have those tough conversations, I was afraid to have the conversation for the same reason. I didn't want to lose those people in my life. And so I think it's important to understand
yeah,
that you have to make a decision as somebody who's undergone trauma for whatever reason. You have to make a decision that is your freedom more important than your loyalty to dysfunction. You
absolutely.
have to be able to make that decision within yourself because it may not go how you want it to go. The conversation may go completely horrible.
Yeah.
You may lose relationships. That can be a byproduct of standing up for yourself, but does that mean you don't?
Mhm.
And that is like a gut check that you have to have with yourself. So
Yep,
for me,
absolutely.
I had to have that conversation. And my conversation, I had one with my dad about him not being there in my life for my entire life, and how we lived in the same city, but it was like we were strangers when we would be around each other. Very, very horrible, traumatic experience with my
Yeah,
dad. And I had that conversation, but the way that I brought the conversation was very critical. The way that I came to the conversation, I had to come to the conversation with the understanding that I was ready to forgive.
yep.
Meaning
You have to.
I was ready to release the pain. When I say
Yep.
forgive, I mean release
Whether they
those
were whether they was going to ask for it or not, or even ask for your
regardless,
forgiveness, it's not.
regardless.
You
Absolutely.
still have to forgive them and
I
move
had to be
on.
open. Absolutely. I had to have that understanding. And that was number one. And number two, I had to have the discipline to not manipulate them in the conversation.
Very much
So
so.
truly, truly just come to the conversation as this is what happened to me, giving my pain a voice. Really, that's it. Whether how they took it, how they didn't take it was not my responsibility. And so if they decided to blow up, if they decided to say that didn't happen, if they decided to completely negate anything I said, it was not for me to keep pushing and pushing and pushing for them to validate my feelings. If I wasn't ready to be in a space where I was open to forgiveness, and if I wasn't ready to not manipulate them to give me an apology, I wasn't ready for the conversation.
Absolutely.
And so that was the work I had to do on myself to get to that place where I could truly do that. And when I did have that conversation, I had it with my dad. I thought I had never even talked to him as a grown up in a grown up space before in my life. And it took until I was 45 to be able to have that conversation.
Wow.
And then I also had the conversation with my mom around that same time. And she was with me throughout my entire life, right? And one conversation went very awesome. And one conversation, I lost a parent. And it wasn't because that I didn't approach the conversation ready to forgive and ready to not manipulate. It was
wasn't
because
ready to receive it.
they wasn't ready to heal.
Yeah.
And then that wasn't even as they wasn't ready to accept their responsibility.
Absolutely.
That's what it boiled down to. And so for me, I had to give them permission to misunderstand what I was saying. And I had to give them permission to heal on their own time. Now, does that mean that I kept them in my life? I couldn't, because I was growing, right? I was moving in a completely different direction.
Yep.
So I love you, and I want all the best for you, but we're not moving in the same direction, healing wise, health wise. At the
expense of my own.
I can't, my mental health.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So for that reason, I have to love you from across the street, right? But it doesn't take away my love. And that, of course, that may be misconstrued on the other side, right? That person may say, like you say, they changed and they did this and they did that. I did change. I changed for the better, for the sake of me and for the sake of my family and for the sake of my children. I did change. And I should applaud myself for that change, not feel horrible because I changed, not let that be a judgment on me, right? So you really, truly, when you are walking through the space, there's one thing about healing for your, walking through it and checking yourself and standing in your mess and going through the dirt. But then there's that other piece of speaking to that person and having those tough conversations. I would not recommend anybody walking in that conversation ready to point a finger, attacking, because that means you're not really healed. Right? Because when you're healed from a situation, that emotional aspect, it may come up. You still may feel those things, those triggers, but you are in a space where the intention of your conversation is well beyond what you're feeling emotionally. And so I just really encourage that, but also understand that if you have the conversation and it goes definitely not like you thought it was going to go in a negative way, that you should still celebrate yourself. And I tell the women that I work with, I tell them, when I say celebrate, I mean celebrate. I mean, go do something that you don't normally do for yourself. Go get yourself some ice cream. Go give yourself a massage. Celebrate yourself. Celebrate the fact that you stood up for yourself, that you gave your pain a voice, because what you did was an awesome thing. It wasn't weak. It wasn't showing weakness. You wasn't whining. You wasn't wearing your feelings on your sleeve, as all these narratives have said. It took so much courage and strength to be able to look at a situation that has happened to you, that traumatized you for all these years, and look at it head on and say, I will no longer allow this to control the way that I live my life. Talk about a courage, talk about a superhero. That's a superhero.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times it's not narrated in that way. And so I definitely believe that if you're going to move forward, when you get to that place, celebrate yourself regardless of how the outcome is, because it took a whole lot of strength to get there.
Very much so. And you know what? For you as a life coach, I want to commend you for using your experiences, right, to help others get through their experiences that are obviously and unfortunately, ideally, the similar or if not the exact same experiences they deal with. But we oftentimes in the Black community, we can have the same pair of glasses on and see something completely different.
Yeah.
It's like we experience the same exact thing, but yet one person registered it this way, the other person registered a different way. And now, too many different narratives are being painted about the same experience or the same situation that both parties, obviously are participated in or were subjected to, right?
Yeah.
And so the fact that my last question for you is that, how has it been for you to, in using your personal experiences as a life coach, help others deal with their own trauma that they're dealing with, especially from a childhood traumatic event perspective?
The people that I've had that I've spoken with, it's definitely been transformational. And I don't view myself as the spearheader. I'm just the facilitator. And so
There you
I'm
go.
so grateful to be able to work in this space and to give my perspective, but also to listen because there's so much value. I don't think people understand how valuable listening skills are. And a lot of us just want people to hear what we've been through, hear our pain. And so being in the position to be able to do that for women has been incredible for me. And the end result is I've been able to witness some true transformations that someone who came and was very staunch and set in their ways and said, me choosing after something happens that I don't like, me choosing to not pick up the phone for that person, even though they're my children and me not talking to them, that's not bad. I'm just, they made their decision and, I just don't want to talk about it. And then learning over time that when they were younger, their safety was silence and they would go in their room and shut themselves in the room when they felt uncomfortable or when they felt upset, that they would go inward and that they were actually going inward on their children. So when they didn't get something that they wanted, they just decided to use silence as a weapon. And watching this person who was very adamant about, I don't do that. And then slowly them realizing that they actually do that and just understanding that the silence can be a wonderful thing in regards to healing and thinking and meditating, but it can also be a weapon and not
Your
weaponizing,
defense
the
mechanism. Yeah,
silence. Yeah,
absolutely.
right, a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And so being able to see that transformation in someone's life and somebody else, who was really struggling to be able to see the goodness in their life and the richness in their life because they couldn't have a child, and being able to share my own personal experience about the difficulties of having children and being able to relate on that level to some degree, but also helping that person to see the blessings that they already had, and just different options. I mean, I never would have had those type of opportunities to hear people's stories, to hear how the cultural habits that we have been given, even in different cultures, different nationalities. Just being able to have those type of conversations with people. I would never have been able to have that opportunity if I would not have been in that car, crying, sobbing, ready to end my life, desperate to heal and to get the pain away. If I would not have started walking through those doors for myself, I would not be on this side that I am right now, living my purpose.
Absolutely. You know what? You are a walking, living testament, and you embody that and test that testimony that most women like yourself have been dealing with for so long. And I really appreciate and respect the work and efforts that you put forth in with having to help those and advocating for more women, more Black women, especially in our Black community, dealing with so many of these traumatic events that took place in their lives where they weren't protected, they wasn't loved, they wasn't nurtured and appreciated, or just well taken care of in general. The fact that you're, putting forth an effort and using your personal journey and experience to help those overcome those same traumatic events in their lives is truly commendable. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing out there. And I know every last one of those Black women appreciate that from you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's definitely an honor to be able to work with people in my culture.
Absolutely. And I hope that we can, the primary focus of this show is to help us get to a place where we, like I said, have those actionable items we can collectively come up with together. Because again, I'm gonna always remind my viewers and listeners, I don't have all the answers, ladies and gentlemen, but I'm willing to listen and learn from those people who share these experiences and on a personal level as well on professional level, and how we can unpack and unravel these situations that we oftentimes ignore, push under the rug, just dismiss altogether as if it being the level of severity that it actually pertains to. It's like we have to be able to get to a better place in life, emotionally, spiritually, physically, financially, mentally, all these different facets of life that we want to get better at. We just have to put our best foot forward collectively together to do that and be that monolithic people so that we each know what our parts are and we're all doing them together to help make for a better culture and better environment, better community that we live in, want to live in. Again, Tima, thank you so much for being on the show to talk about this. I hope it inspires and encourages many of people who are out there listening. I want you all to take heed to what's been said on this episode because there's so many things to unpack. And I know for each and every one of us that's living through these situations and traumatic events, still dealing with them, just know that that journey is what you're going to experience. You're going to appreciate more the more progress you make, whether it's little progress or a huge progress in certain aspects of areas. Again, celebrate yourself in those moments because you made the choice, the conscientious choice to make those progresses in life because you want a better life for yourself and for those around you, whether you're a parent, a spouse, or just a friend or a sibling or someone else's child. You wanted to make that decision for yourself to have a better life for yourself and be an inspiration to somebody else. So that's the first step. And you all should be commended for taking that first step and admitting that, okay, I have some things that I have to unravel and unpack. I'm going to make this conscious decision personally to live my life the best way I know how to be the best version of myself that I know how to be, that I know I have inside of me to do. And so, again, thank you, Tamer, for being such a huge
Oh, thank
inspiration
you.
and just motivating, Black women to live their best lives and be the best versions of themselves that they have it in them to do.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I definitely look forward to having you on the show again, talk more about the other areas of needs that we have to address as well when it comes to unpacking traumatic events in general. This one was
Absolutely.
specifically about childhood trauma, but there are other traumas that we're dealing with too that not necessarily linked to what it was during our upbringing, right? And so those types of
Absolutely.
things have to be unpacked as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, make sure you like, share, subscribe yet again to the podcast. Speak to the mic. You can find it on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. Definitely subscribe to it on YouTube, and you'll get to see both. You'll get the audio and the video versions of these episodes on this podcast show. This is very vital and important information as it pertains to people coming from our Black communities that we all come from. And it's information being brought to you by people who look just like us, who have been through similar, if not the identical situations that we're dealing with or have dealt with in the past. So you don't want to miss out on this information. Yeah, Tim, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show. I look forward to hearing from you again. Continue with your tremendous efforts and advocacy of helping Black women overcome these traumatic events in their lives. Again, million thanks for you for doing that.
My pleasure.
If you like what you've heard from this week's episode and would like to hear more from previous episodes, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel below. You can also find me on social media platforms at Speak to the Mic _podcast show on Instagram and Speak to the Mic podcast show on Facebook. Be sure to also like, share, and subscribe to my Spotify page at Speak to the Mic podcast show. As I put out more thought-provoking content, your opinion and thoughts are needed and appreciated. I thank you all in advance for your support and look forward to hearing from you soon.